Our next panel is titled AI Vendor Evaluation and Organization. Our moderator is Eugene Levin, and he is going to introduce the rest of the panelists.
Thank you, everybody. So hope you're enjoying the conference and you had a good lunch. So my name is Eugene Levin. I am going to introduce myself. I have a somewhat technical background. I graduated from NYU twice with computer science and then information systems background. I spent my entire career in financial services. I worked for companies like JP Morgan, American Express, New York Stock Exchange, Citi, and the last 10 years I've been at Credit Suisse, and in my role of global head of software quality and project governance, I'm responsible for making sure that all of the changes that go into production from about 500 projects annually to about 1,100 investment banking applications, that they go through review by governance disciplines such as information security, security architecture, business continuity management, legal counsel, production support, etc. So that's my role. So most of my background is governance, risk compliance, and conference organizers asked us to share a fun fact about ourselves, and my fun fact is that both of my parents used to be college professors, so from early on I learned that perfection is not possible or achievable, and there is always more to learn. So I'm looking forward to an interesting and informative discussion. And I'm going to pass it to Mike.
Thank you, Eugene. Mike Krygier, Deputy CISO for New York City Cyber Command, responsible for urban technology. And urban technology is really everything to do with smart city cybersecurity, critical infrastructure cybersecurity, application security, vulnerability management, public safety, and there's also election cybersecurity. So quite kind of a broad spanning portfolio, everything that really doesn't fit into kind of neat cybersecurity buckets in a traditional CISO role really has ended up in the urban tech bucket. Fun fact about me, I've lived and worked in 4 different countries before joining the mission here for Cyber Command.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lars McCarter. I run the Network Operations and Security Center at Coast Guard Cyber Command. So we do everything from all of our service desks to NOSC, SOC, basically anything inside of, a little feedback, IT operations we control, as well as our deployable cyber protection teams. So actually, recent work with New York here and New York Cyber Command to a degree. But at any rate, technical background as well came up and now relegated to the management ranks. Fun facts, I forgot about these. So I just recently got a kayak I'm an avid fisherman, so I'm learning fishing in a kayak, which is a fun yet weird thing to do.
It's funny. So do I.
It is.
Cool. Awesome. Good afternoon, everyone. Matt McFadden. I'm with General Dynamics Information Technology. We are one of the largest providers for IT services in the federal government. So as part of my role, I lead our cyber capabilities, alliances, and strategy when it comes to cyber across some of the largest federal agencies out there. So we do everything from FedCiv to the intelligence community to the DoD. We have about 5,000 cyber professionals. We operate some of the largest security operations centers. So part of what we're trying to strategize is how do we best use AI and machine learning to drive how the next generation SOC works. So, and a fun fact, I'm also an avid kayak fisherman.
Now we know what we're doing this weekend.
John Prokap. I don't fish, but sometimes we fish our users, different fishing. I'm the CISO of HarperCollins Publishers. We're the 2nd largest English language publisher in the world. I run the global security program based out of Princeton, New Jersey. Our headquarters is here in New York, but we also have significant operations in London, Toronto, Sydney, and Nashville. History of my career is a little bit technical, but I originally, and I guess this is also my fun fact, graduated with an English and philosophy degree. So I've sort of come full circle going back into publishing.
Excellent, thank you for the introduction. So before we start the discussion, I always try to understand the audience, and I'm just curious, so by the show of hands, how many people in this audience represent vendors that offer cybersecurity products or services? Excellent, excellent. And how many people are involved in evaluating vendors or making recommendations or in decision-making roles? Perfect, excellent. So this is just the right audience for this kind of discussion. And then finally, and most importantly, who saw Game of Thrones yesterday?
Ooh, a lot minutes.
No,
All right.
no spoilers.
No spoilers. Please come and network with me afterwards, please. Okay. All right, so today's discussion, conversation is about cybersecurity vendors that exist in the market and about evaluating their AI capabilities and claims. Estimates vary, but there may be over 2,000 cybersecurity vendors in the market, and a lot of them claim that they're leveraging AI technologies and machine learning techniques. How can a security professional decipher if leveraging AI adds value? Is it even a good idea? Is it an advantage? And which guidelines can a security organization follow when selecting new vendors or evaluating current vendors? So that's to frame our discussion today. And with that, I'll ask Mike, what are the criteria for evaluating cybersecurity vendors, and what role do you think AI should play in your evaluation?
So I think AI is really, showing its strength, particularly in the critical infrastructure space, which, I'm looking for new solutions currently. And so vendors have been looking to apply mostly ML. I would really have to call it ML rather than AI at this stage to understand how critical infrastructure devices are communicating, and then to be able to, surface threats from that. But how we evaluate them is we really want to understand what are their algorithms, how do they train those algorithms, what is the rate of false positive, and what is the rate of false negative that they have. So these are kind of some of the questions that I start to think about. And as we're vetting, the vendors, I want to bring in my, chief data scientist probably pretty early into the discussion. We're lucky to have an in-house data scientist, and he's really able to then, agnostic of security, really able to drill in and ask those very tough AI type questions.
Excellent. Lars?
Yeah, so I think we're a little different in government space than civilian space. But the first thing is kind of, what is it that we need, right? What is it that I can't do? And I'm torn because I want to say, first you need the basic stuff before you can get the more advanced stuff, whether we're talking about something that's automated, whether it's autonomous, whether it's actually uses machine learning, whatever. So start with basics first, but there's an opportunity, I would say, to skip some of the basics. And some vendors might provide a solution that you can almost kind of buy out of the box. Maybe you don't have the robust human capital to run it as well, or run the basics as well as you might need. But that's kind of the first thing, is what is it that we want? We get into the lingo a lot, and whether or not it's machine learning, whether or not it's AI. What are the things that you need to do, and what are your risks? Obviously, it's a little lofty for a technical discussion, but that would be my kind of first gut.
Sure. So just, from my standpoint, I would say every single vendor, they claim some type of AI and machine learning. But what I really feel like we're trying to drive from a customer standpoint is it's really about that outcome, and the outcome is near zero threat detect and response in almost zero real time, right? So that affects many different aspects of your cyber posture. So from an operational perspective, yeah, it's very easy to apply AI or machine learning to detect a threat on a very niche endpoint, right? But how do you actually apply that holistically across your enterprise? So when we're looking at something like the DoD, or with I think 4 million plus endpoints, different enclaves, different sub-agencies as part of a large enterprise, well, how do you begin to apply that machine learning across the holistic network? And I think that is a big deficiency now in kind of the vendor landscape. So, I would say it's really about driving that outcome. So, you're not going to get that by buying a product tomorrow. It's kind of a phased implementation. But I would say, part of driving that maturity with organizations is just figure out first what type of outcomes you're trying to determine, and then apply those to your AI vendors.
Yeah, if I may build on what Matt just said, you're really looking at what risk are you solving. So if it's we need to monitor our assets better, if it's we need to detect things on our endpoint better, what risk are you solving, and then how does AI complement that? It's not, I need an AI solution for X, I need a solution to reduce a risk, to increase attacker costs, to decrease my costs. So if using an AI or ML tool can limit my TCO, my total cost of ownership, by making my analysts more effective, in a small organization, that's definitely a big sell. You want to be able to say, okay, you're now twice as powerful because it's not you watching the screen, it's you watching an AI tool that's digesting large amounts of data and synthesizing it into something you can leverage.
I completely agree with you. I think the focus should always be on the outcome and problem that you're trying to solve, and the AI is just a useful tool. Now, having said that, if you know that you're dealing with a vendor that's leveraging AI, how would your approach differ from if you were just dealing with a vendor that's using other traditional technologies? Which, in your mind, which other risks would that introduce? Anybody? Yes.
I'll take that one.
Please go.
So, and that's another problem, in the industry in general, is a lot of times these vendors were somewhat locked into this vendor landscape or ecosystem. When you go into some environments, they have 150 disparate tools. So, one of the strategies behind AI application is focus on your foundational tools. Focus on the things that can help really limit that, I want to say, that complexity. When we're looking at our adversaries, they thrive in complexity. So the more tools that we have to manage, the less, the more increased risk. So the interesting thing is, when I go into an environment, a lot of times we'll ask the question, well, the customer will say, I want to need AI or machine learning. But a lot of times they really may only need automation, which is a little bit different than the AI and machine learning that we think of. And that could be automation from just remediating things that we find on the network to automating SOC tasks for the cyber operators. So I'll pause there.
I would maybe add, you're looking at, you're looking at who owns the algorithm? Have they actually developed the algorithm? Do they have all the intellectual property? Are they incorporating any of their libraries or licensing or sub-licensing any technologies? And should that become an issue? Where are they in their cycle? Are they a startup? What's their kind of exit plan if you're going to make a significant investment and move kind of your security operations center processes into this tool or leverage it? What is their plan? Are they planning to get acquired? Are they planning to grow? Can the algorithm scale in the language that it's coded in? So you want to understand how it's built. And then also how cloud-friendly it is. So, for example, we leverage the cloud extensively, but some of these startups have really focused on building a box with the algorithms in the box. So, can we take them out of that box and actually put them on the cloud and have them scale to, our environment, which is about 1 million endpoints. New York City is a very, very large city, 70 different agencies, right? So, we really need that scalability. So, those are some of the, I think, the nuanced questions that you have to think about when you're dealing with AI startups.
Yeah, well, I would agree with everything the other panelists had mentioned. Obviously, as our data moves to various places, we're not going to have this nice surrounded perimeter. Some of the questions that I like to ask are, hey, not just indicators of compromise, but where's the threat intelligence coming from? How is other attacks on other users shared in that commercial cloud? How is that threat intelligence shared amongst everybody who has that product? And that's where a lot of vendors shine, I would say. We have a product that's worked really well for us on the mail side of the house. And depending on how willing you are to share your information or how willing other entities are willing to share theirs, from my perspective, very DoD-ish. Our networks are all part of the DoD. We're at a place where the commercial cyber threat intelligence is surpassing anything that we have on the classified side. I mean, there's still nuggets, obviously, on the classified side, but that ability to do things rapidly in machine time is really compelling. So,
I also think it's part of your proof of concept phase. You want to make sure that your staff is able to work with the tool. That you're not required to be a data scientist to use the AI tool. That it's actually something that's enabling the team and helping them be more effective, rather than, okay, now you've got this interface that nobody can actually use, unless you've got a data scientist and 5 engineers. You're trying to make the analysts more powerful, not have them take an additional level of training just to use the tool.
So John, a lot of the vendors now say that they're using AI, and that became somewhat of a blanket term. And when we say, when they say that they're using AI, do we clearly understand what that means? Is it just machine learning, or any other techniques that you came across?
I think that 5 people could say AI and mean 5 different things.
Exactly.
And generally, in my experience, it's either meant some basic form of automation all the way through to advanced machine learning. So I'm not an AI subject matter expert, but some of these are, okay, you have a script and you're calling it AI, and others, this is actually an algorithm that gets more intelligent as you feed more data into it. It's learning, and now that is machine learning, that is, I guess, AI. But when a vendor says AI, they could mean anything.
Yeah, I'd ask them, where's your peer-reviewed literature for your algorithms? Like, have you published anything? Can you show us a white paper? What are the credentials, the academic credentials or otherwise, of the people that have been involved in creating this? And if it's not there, then there's really some additional due diligence that needs to take place.
So Lars, what would be some of the questions that you would ask vendors that claim that you're using AI?
Yeah, so I think one of the big questions is, can the service, capability, whatever it is, actually learn and do something differently on day 2 than it would in day 1? But it's more complicated than that, right? Because does it do something differently based on something that it has itself taught itself? And that's, I think, very, very rare, if not non-existent in several situations. Without going into all the specifics of the algorithms, right? Because nobody's going to sit there and like, hey, we're not going to review code here. At least I'm not. But it is interesting, to John's point, as far as what is the definition of automated versus autonomous. I read a book recently, Army of None, I think it was called. It was fascinating, the numbers of definitions. It's mostly about automated weapon systems, but it's very pertinent in this discussion. And I think, what is AI versus machine learning? Is it doing something different? Can it learn and advance and week after week increase the detection rate for something that it wouldn't have found the day before potentially? And I'm finding is just one thing, but that's something I would ask.
Anything to add? Would you like to? John?
I think I'm good.
Matt?
I'm good.
Okay. All right. So Mark Siegel, the gentleman from NSA who had our keynote speaker, one of the things he mentioned is that the data doesn't stay static. And just because we trained our model with the data we say that we had today doesn't mean that our algorithms can handle unpredictable situations. So are you concerned about some of the risks that are introduced as part of the data that was used to train the algorithm?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, was it trained on, we're a government entity or many different verticals within the government, but, was it trained on, FI data? Was it particularly geared to one vertical? And now, they're branching out and applying that, training set or that test set to us and saying, it'll work in your environment because it's worked for manufacturing or retail or whatever the other segments may be. So I think that training data, needs to be somehow tailored to the environment. Or at least the test data, the onus is on them to prove that it would, through a POC or other means, that it would actually work on the data that we're generating as New York City.
John?
I think it depends on the application. So if you're looking at, let's say, endpoint detection and response, attacker patterns can be similar across verticals. But if you're looking at a tool like DLP, highly unique. So your government data versus books. Going to be very, very different data sets, and in some cases it may even go to the usability of the tool in that enterprise. So some tools, if you're just looking for somebody exfilling data, trying to escalate privilege on an endpoint, that pretty much is going to look the same across any vertical, unless you're looking at very, very specific, okay, this data is important versus this data is not important. That's going to require, I think, specific domain training.
Yeah, I would say that it's all about the data that you give it, right? So I'm surprised I haven't heard Tesla brought up, once at this conference at least yet. But just Google Tesla autopilot crash videos, and you'll see the extremities, right? So it's all about Yeah, I see it as kind of, the detection. You're detecting an advanced persistent threat. Most of the times, those threats are unknown. So if those threats are unknown, obviously it's a challenge to train on that. So, a lot of these AI vendors probably are good with, training on known threats. But, how much validation have we done about the unknown threat? So I think, I kind of feel like the industry is kind of moving similar to how the open source initiative we begin to validate open source code, and now it's very, very streamlined in government. Well, I kind of see that happening with algorithms. I think we put a lot of trust in them, but we don't really understand how were they designed, what data were they trained on, where do we get the data from? Are adversaries injecting data, adversarial AI? Lots and lots of questions.
Yeah, that was another point that was mentioned in the morning. Adversarial AI and data being used to game the algorithms.
And building on that a little bit, you've got adversaries who use VirusTotal to train their malware to go, okay, I'm going to run this through until it scans clean, and then I'm going to put it out there. How soon is it until they, to your point, start using that for AI and ML tools?
Yeah, I would say too, it is environmentally sensitive, right? Because we're talking about advanced stuff, right? How well can you find advanced stuff? But a lot of the stuff we can use it to find the easy stuff, right? And help us sort through the more difficult stuff and use potentially other tools for that. But if you're, in our environment, we have multiple layers before the perimeter, right? So how do we put a tool in place so that it's able to learn, observe traffic, develop trends when it's already behind certain abstraction layers of security, right? So we have to that's tough. And that's also, in my case, very bureaucratic. But otherwise, you don't get the full capability that potentially the vendor provides.
Okay, so let's move on. And Matt, let me start with you this time around. So, how would you decide if you want to build some capability in-house versus go with a vendor?
This is a good question. I feel like many times it's about the mission or the application. So a lot of times I feel like the vendor gives you a quicker solution, but it might not be as customized to what you may need to fit the environment. So like when we're looking at SCADA or industrial control systems or some very mission-centric type applications, I think that's probably the better way to go. I feel like, from a commercial standpoint, a lot of vendors have the capability sets. I think you just need to understand what's kind of best for your environment, and obviously, there's a cost to it. So, it goes back to what I said, initially. It's all about the outcome. If you can determine the outcome that you want to drive towards, then I think that will help with your selection.
Anybody wants to?
I think in mid-sized enterprise, it's almost always a buy or don't buy decision, not a, we're going to build our own AI. Just maybe in 5 years, I'd have a different answer.
Yeah, we've actually gone ahead and built our own. So tomorrow, there's going to be a talk by my colleague, our chief data scientist, Michael Mcfadden. So we built a platform. He's actually been, building that platform. We looked at the vendor landscape and just didn't find something that could easily fit or didn't require kind of a massive overhaul to fit our requirements. So we've been able to create something. So I won't steal his thunder by talking too much about it here.
Okay.
I think both is right. There's not a right or wrong answer. Generally, I would default to buy. And that's just, again, to hit on complexity. If, depending on where your human capital is, and mine is, they come in and then they quickly leave, right? they get hired by everybody else. So how do we keep it as simplistic for them as we, keep them, able to use the tool in something that's supportable, and get really, really good with this one tool, and then as we realize the limitations of it, start to build customized capability for the certain things that we need to do. So protecting the enterprise, or for my enterprise, it's more, hey, commercially centric, but hey, if I have to deploy to SCADA type stuff, which we're starting to train to, well then you need more nuanced capabilities, because there's not a lot of vendors that are particularly deploying automated threat hunting capabilities for SCADA systems. At least if you are, that's great. So my thoughts.
So I believe that we can learn a lot from situations where things didn't go well, and I think it's going to be fascinating if you can share some of the stories where things with vendors didn't go as planned, and maybe what have you learned from it, and how was it finally resolved, and what did you do to kind of put it on track? Whoever wants to volunteer.
We had a tool. It was a machine learning tool that did log analysis, but I won't mention the vendor's name. And initially, it was really helpful because we were finding problems in our environment. We were able to make corrective action. We were able to change, for example, firewall rules or other infrastructure controls. But as time went on, it actually became less and less intelligent. It kind of detuned itself as the environment became more secure. And eventually we had to eliminate the tool because we just couldn't get it to be functional. I mean, it was helpful for a time and it did improve our overall security and risk posture. But in the end, it wouldn't learn anymore once we had a reasonably robust set of controls in place for what it was looking at.
Yeah, I think one of the good use cases is kind of the endpoint at the edge that's disconnected. So a lot of traditional endpoints, they're based on signatures or heuristics. So using something at the edge where you don't have to rely on that. If you have a very, I want to say, slow pipe, allows you to have kind of that comprehensive level of security to some degree, but not having to rely on kind of those frequent updates.
So, unfortunately, multiple bad stories, but we have difficulty with a lot of our deployed assets. Those are on disadvantaged links, and not necessarily an AI problem, but controlling those capabilities in disadvantaged link situations is challenging because if you lose connectivity, then things can really kind of go south quickly. But I would say to larger, more of a program thing, not specific vendors. We're working through panes of Joint Regional Security Stack, which is a DoD thing. It's kind of, everybody come and use these same security stacks at your perimeter. And again, not an AI problem particularly, but we're using tools, and so many of them in a way that's very complex. And there's a lot of opportunity to break things, and we've broken a lot of things. All part of learning, but I would say if you have the opportunity, look at one thing at a time, kind of in a serial fashion, right? In this case, we brought on essentially dozens of new tools all at once, and it's very hard to detect what might work or what might not work. It's the nature of government acquisitions and the way that program's working, and nothing particular against that program, but the smaller changes that you can make, the better, and then allow yourself some reset time and then move on to the next. And that's why I believe I'm huge on demos and working them inside of your environment to see how they go.
Yeah, noise, false positives with multiple vendors, and working through the POC to tune those down to understand is there a path forward or not. So I think we all kind of suffer from some of that. So.
Okay. So as you're selecting vendors, I guess this question has two parts. As you're selecting vendor, what are some of the red flags that will go up in your head as you are talking to the vendor and going through their presentations and materials? And on the other side, what are some of the things that vendors can do to start earning credibility with you and to start earning your trust?
I can take that first. So a couple things. So one, I always ask, are you a part of the Cyber Threat Alliance? That's an alliance that shares threat intel, so they have access to pretty good data sets to train on some of this stuff. The second thing is, do you have open APIs? So there's something called IACD, the Integrated Adaptive Cyber Defense Framework. It's an open framework where they're trying to drive the security industry to have extensible tool sets that kind of interact with one another. So Forrester Gartner came out with a term called SOAR in the last year, and it stands for Security Orchestration, Automation, and Response. And basically, it's a way for cybersecurity products to integrate with one another. So if one platform kind of sees a threat, we can automate the response actions across the environment, which is very, very effective. So when I look at a vendor, I want to be able to apply that tool holistically. The other thing I'll quickly mention is I think there's a big difference between a cyber analytic and a tool. So when I look to the cyber analytics side, when we look to machine learning, it's really about just kind of training algorithms to detect new threats. So if I have the ability in the product to develop, share, redeploy new algorithms, I think that's a very important part of the product.
I agree. Does it interact with the other tools? And also from what a big red flag is, are you over-promising me? Is this a panacea out of the box that's going to solve all my problems? Or, hey, John, you've got these 20 risks you're really worried about right now. We solve these 3. We solve these 2 really well, this one okay. Be honest. I mean, I think that goes whether it's AI or not, but a lot of vendors will overhype their AI capabilities. We're not buying Skynet here. It's not going to automate everything in the enterprise. What realistically are you doing? Are you looking for advanced threats? Are you, looking for data leaving my environment? And how do you solve that problem?
Yeah, I would. The what are your limitations is huge, right? Because you can have that conversation without divulging any secret sauce, right? And then we know, and we can kind of figure out a place in the architecture where it would fit. If it fits, what is it that you get after? Because everything has limitations. As he said, nothing's Skynet. But what can you do? Because that might be something that we critically need. And if it integrates with the rest of the enterprise and it has all the right interfaces, right APIs, then that's a great thing that you can do, and then and that helps build credibility with us. Not that we can necessarily guarantee it, at least I can't as part of the acquisition process, but it might become a requirement, so to speak.
I would echo the same, like a sober assessment of what the tool, the solution can actually do versus what, and marketing folk and sales folk, God bless them, but they promise a lot of things, but we want to quickly be able to have that real conversation with the developers, the creators of the solution, to say, what does it really do versus what does it not do? And if we start hearing, 100% totally effective panacea type statements, then that just immediately is a red flag.
Wonderful, wonderful. So obviously cybersecurity solutions have been around for quite some time. What do you see some of the major opportunities that artificial intelligence technologies bring in addition to the existing solutions to your organization?
I'll take it. I think for me, it's a potential to reduce manning to the greatest extent possible while still allowing humans to assess what's going on. It's money, right? Whether it's contracting or whether it's, hey, I have a lack of ability to build these personnel. Now we can potentially reduce some of or offload some of the tasks that we could clearly automate or make more autonomous. And those might be the less desirable functions, but if we can do that in a way that meaningfully reduces the need to have humans stare at screens, and they can do that, the machines can do that processing for those humans, then we're just going to be much more effective across the enterprise. We'll be able to focus more on those real deep problems that are probably there, but we probably don't have time to look for them or know how to look for them because we're focused on these alerts that are right or wrong.
It increases the productivity of your analysts, which will either reduce your costs or eliminate your need to hire headcount that you probably don't have authorization for. And it also, to Lars's point, you touched on this a little bit, it makes the analyst's job more fulfilling. They're not going to be staring at a screen all day, or they might be staring at a screen to do more interesting work, and that's going to help with job retention.
So what other opportunities can you think of?
Yeah, I think workforce is a huge part of this. So the argument is always, well, AI is going to replace my cyber team. I think I went to another conference and they were like, well, how many people do you think I have in my SOC? And the answer is 1, because I use AI and machine learning. And I don't know if that's realistic, but it really goes to that vendor prioritization. Not vendor prioritization, workforce prioritization. So a lot of times the tier 1 folks are just trivial data, looking at probably 80% spearfish emails every day. We really want them focusing on kind of that tier 2, tier 3, those persistent threats. So I think AI is a definite way that we can help allow our workforce to be more prioritized on kind of what is the risk to the environment. And especially, being down in DC, I mean, there's, I was on another panel for workforce. There's like 3.5 million cyber jobs upcoming, 0% unemployment. I think there's like 350,000 open jobs now. So the reality is you can't hire all the best cyber people. You have to begin to really use automation and AI and machine learning to help solve that problem.
Yeah, for us, it's a workforce multiplier, as was mentioned, and also allows the analyst to move up the kind of the value chain of what they're dealing with. But also, it helps us address kind of the volume of data and the volume of alerts that we receive, which we wouldn't be able to. I think even if we had budget and the people were available, I don't think we could staff enough people to actually triage with people all those events. So that's where AI really comes into play for us.
Sounds good. So now that we discussed the opportunities, what do you think are some of the major threats and risks that arise from the use of artificial intelligence technologies that would keep you awake at night? Yeah.
One that's related to workforce is workforce continuity. As you enable an analyst to become a more powerful analyst with AI tools, so traditionally you had your 1, 2, 3 tiers. Well, now your 2s and 3s are becoming 4s because they've got better tools, better analytics. Where do the next batch of 2s and 3s come from if there's no need for tier 1 analytics because you've automated it all? So you're gonna have a training challenge, you're gonna have a workforce challenge going forward. I think part of that is solved through education, part of that is solved in larger enterprises where they have a workforce development path, and you can have junior analysts or train people off the help desk, et cetera.
Good, alrighty. I think that whole concept of adversarial AI is what we need to worry about. No one is really validating these algorithms. We're not looking at the data that's being fed to them. A lot of times some of these vendors have very proprietary ecosystems, and we don't really understand how they interact with one another. So I think the more that we can be more open with it, and I think from an analytical standpoint, really kind of open up some of the cyber analytics of these algorithms, I think the better.
Yeah, I mean, from threat space, obviously, that will continue to grow, right? And that will pose an increasing risk to us, and then we will have to then redeploy in kind, right? It's the natural arms race; these things happen. But how do we get around it, or how do we build our enterprise, our environment, our personnel to be able to deal with that and think about the way that they're going to have to automate tasks to more quickly deal with the automated threats or soon to be autonomous threats, et cetera. I think that's to John's point. How do we build people to be prepared for that? It's the next echelon, right? Of hey, we're not just taking somebody out of their mom's basement anymore, right? And starting them. They've got to be bigger, kind of strategic thinkers to a degree, and that's good, but also challenging.
Yeah, I think AI for offense is kind of the next frontier as as these models are being trained up and penetration testers are, I'm aware of a couple of startups that are trying to do this. They're using this platform and they're training these pen testers. They're using these pen testers to train these tools that can then go and automatically attack web apps and other things. So how quickly will kind of other nation states or other governments adapt that kind of technology? They don't need teams of people to go out and do attacks. They'll just point this AI, which will be more intelligent than kind of a vulnerability scanner or whatever traditional method. And then what do you need from a defense perspective at machine speed to be able to respond to that? So maybe we'll end up in kind of a future. There was a classic Star Trek episode where the war is fought on a big AI computer, and then that's how it's decided. I don't know if we're going to get there, but
yeah. To your point, tools are amoral. Just as Metasploit can be used against us today, the next gen AI penetration testing tool will be used against us in the future.
So artificial intelligence for cybersecurity is an incredibly rich topic, and I'm sure that we're just starting the conversation on many of these aspects. So which question you wished I asked you that I haven't yet, and is there any piece of wisdom that you would like to impart on the audience and would like to share?
I mean, I would say it's exciting, and certainly don't be afraid of new technology, right? Embrace it. So the places that we've used it, it's been successful. Yeah, there's challenges along the way, but there have certainly been significant strides in our enterprise as far as being able to deal with certain things that we weren't able to adequately deal with in the past. That requires some planning, but as times change, I wouldn't kind of delay, so to speak, unless you're in the state where you don't have any of the basics and you don't know where to go. But just go ahead and jump in. Give some things a try. Ask. Especially if you're in corporate space, and it's easy to kind of bring these demos in and go through some of this stuff. And you don't have to, charge $1 for a demo like we do, or whatever God knows acquisition process, and see how it works.
John?
Yeah, the need for due diligence doesn't go away just because there's AI in the field, or in the tool, and it's. Continue to attend events like these, network with your peers, see what works. I mean, obviously, we're not going to give you vendor recommendations from the stage, but your peers out there, I'm sure they've worked with something like, or maybe the tool that you're looking at specifically. So you want to get that firsthand reference. You want to still POC things either against your data or in some segment of your environment, depending on what the tool is. Just because it has AI or ML, it may not be right for your environment. It may not be properly trained for your enterprise or your industry, excuse me, but you want to just vet it and make sure that the machine learning is going to work for you.
Sure, I'd probably like to see more around kind of the adversary playbooks and how they interact with AI and machine learning tools. So, it's you've probably heard of the MITRE attack framework one and many times. So, how are we using those similar frameworks in classifying, certain APT indicators for detection using those algorithms? I think it's really about just finding those unknown threats. And once we do, how do we apply that holistic, near zero response, in the enterprise? So the more that we can do that, the better.
Yeah, I would echo something Lars said earlier about embracing AI and using it to leapfrog. Kind of, I think a lot of security programs, a lot of things have been tried in security over the past 20, 25 years. I think AI kind of brings the potential to leapfrog. So if you're starting out and building your security program, maybe you're not going to build as much of the traditional. Maybe you're going to take some of these newer approaches to get ahead of the curve, rather than trying to build the telephone lines versus the mobile phone.
I think it's the new basics. Because you can't get away from having something to protect your endpoints, but do you need antivirus or do you need a next-gen tool that's got machine learning in it, just as an example.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for the very interesting discussion. We still have a little bit of time, and I've been networking with quite a few people today, and I know that there is a tremendous amount of intellectual power in this room. So I want to open the floor to some of the questions from the audience. If anybody would like to ask anything to the esteemed panel members. Yeah. Wait for the microphone, just a second. Yeah.
So thank you all for this information, and you are all at mature organizations that have obviously taken security very seriously. But I always have a suspicion that at a large number of enterprises that may not have that level of sophistication, there comes a question in terms of ROI. Is there a better utility for the few dollars that the security budget has to be spent on building out the fundamentals to get to your level, or trying to leapfrog with AI? I think there's a trend towards trying to leapfrog, but I think, and I'd love all your thoughts, AI to me comes after as a cherry on the top, and it's not the sundae. And how do you kind of deal with and educate people when this is the next big thing on a lot of people's tongues?
I can. Oh,
yeah. Lars, go.
Sorry. So I would. Depends on where you're at, right? If it's a small, immature organization, right? So then your biggest bang for your buck are going after the most basic, like top 20 type stuff, right? Like, do you have those things, right? Or do you think you can understand or conceptualize those things before? Yes, because otherwise it's not going to help you probably. And then I would say a natural a probably preliminary question would be, should I be doing this in the first place, right? Or should I just potentially buy it, right? Should I go do an MSSP or something? I mean, I don't know what enterprise architecture or anything going on, but that after you've decided, hey, I've got to do this in-house, then if you started those fundamentals and you can go check, you feel confident through the first kind of 10 or whatever, which are probably going to cost not a lot of money, then you can really kind of leapfrog that next step of what you would need in the SOC type stuff. But if you don't have kind of that basics, like if you're using shared usernames and passwords across all the enterprise, like you're wasting your money.
Oh yeah, I had to jump on this question. So I'm big on foundational tools. So you got to spend on your foundation, right? So the question I always go to, the first step in providing security to your enterprise is situational awareness. If you don't know what you don't have, how can you protect it? AI and machine learning isn't going to help you. So if you have multiple clouds, stuff on premise, rogue laptops connecting to your network, AI machine learning is just going to tell you kind of how bad your network really is. So.
Yeah, to Lars's point about the top 20, the first two are inventory.
Yeah.
Know what you have, and then you have to know what you secure, and you've got your control objectives. And if a control objective is better solved through an advanced technology than a basic one, go for it. But don't let that stop you from putting out decent password policies and patching your systems. Because if you're not going to do that, then all the fancy gear in the world will just find more problems because you got hacked a lot.
Yeah, I think the ROI question is key, right? And some of the CIS top 20 controls, fantastic, but by the time you would get done with doing them in an environment as large, the attackers may already be all over your environment. So you may need to accelerate parts of your strategy, live with the reality that you won't have complete visibility over all of your assets. You won't be able to convince everybody to have a strong password, but you still need to protect that environment. And so how can you leverage those new technologies to detect even those people who are making those simple mistakes and help them kind of educate them?
I have a question for everyone. IDC the last year and a half has been writing about making data the new perimeter, effectively decomposing the old perimeter into the data itself. What are your thoughts on this?
This is like the BeyondCorp, the zero perimeter. That it's really been, I would say it's been older than that. It's been talked about since the mid-2000s. I think it started out of the UK. The perimeter has kind of faded away to an appreciable degree through cloud and data and moving into the cloud and services being based on the cloud. I would broadly agree with kind of the perimeter is dead, but getting to a BeyondCorp type scenario, I think is extremely kind of challenging for all but the most recent startups, which have kind of been born in the cloud, and organizations which have just started out there to move a large traditional kind of enterprise with a lot of legacy IT into that model will take probably many years of effort. And again, the ROI of doing that needs to be looked at very carefully.
So we're definitely going through that issue where the perimeter, even in DoD, right, we have perimeters, but we don't have perimeters. Right? So it's where is the operational information, and then what perimeter is around that operational information, and so try as we might to build walls around that data wherever it might go to enforce cloud security requirements, et cetera. There's going to be data that exists outside, and so I think holistically, what level of security do you need to apply and ensure that it's applied through some mechanism across the various locations that it exists at any point in time? It's a challenge, but it also opens up a lot of opportunities, right? Because now maybe I don't have to sit here and worry so much about the perimeter, or I can look at other things where the data is at and potentially save some headaches there.
Any other comments?
I just think you have multiple perimeters in any defense in depth strategy. The perimeter is the perimeter. You still have your firewalls. I don't think a lot of companies are throwing out their firewalls just yet. But the endpoint's also the perimeter and has been for as long as we've allowed remote access. So what are you doing to secure the endpoint? And then to Lars's point, when the data leaves your enterprise, when it leaves one of those perimeters, or are you securing it? Do you care? Is it in the public domain, or it's protected by copyright and that's sufficient? Or do we have to put DLP or DRM or some other rights management on that?
Okay, I think we have time for maybe one more question. The gentleman in the back.
Yes, I'd like to ask Lars. With the government finally utilizing cloud services, is this an asset to you, or is this complicating your
Both. So, well, I mean, we're going to follow DoD, right? Obviously, there's lots of contracts coming out here shortly. So, it was oversold, right? Cloud, but cloud without security, right? So now we're realizing, okay, so we want to do cloud, but to do security, it's going to cost more than we originally thought. So everybody's wrapping their head around that, right? So I think what that does is, more than anything, it provides potentially resiliency to us, which is huge inside of government, right? Because now we can have, potentially multiple data sets in multiple locations, and yeah, it's going to be a headache. It's going to be a headache on the acquisition side. It's going to be an acquisition on the defensive side. But in the end of the day, if we can do it smartly, it's going to provide more resiliency. And I don't necessarily have to worry about maintaining boxes or maintaining, essentially, right? Where I can my job now is to make sure that it's maintained elsewhere, and then I can kind of focus on the data. And that's, I tell all my my junior managers, it's where the data's at, right? Focus on that, and then work out from there, and how we can ensure that the data is always available. Kind of basic stuff. But my thoughts.
Are you a Cape May?
What?
Are you down in Cape May?
No, I'm in Alexandria, Virginia.
Okay, one last question, one more. Okay, Barry, over there. Yeah, wait for the mic. I think. What?
Sorry. Can you raise your hand? Sorry.
You can hear him.
I was wondering, when you guys were talking about the use of artificial intelligence in penetration testing and offensive operations, how much of a structural asymmetry do you think this is going to create? Right now, the general premise of security is that if you put adequate resources into security, you can create enough of an asymmetry of difficulty to breach your systems that most attackers will go elsewhere. That doesn't always work. If there's a very high value target and a very resource rich attacker, that's a different calculation, but in most cases it does. As computing power is increasing and the use of artificial intelligence in offensive operations is going to completely change the capacity of resource poor actors to engage in very sophisticated operations, will this fundamentally change the balance of offensive and defensive capabilities in the midterm?
Anybody wants to take a stab at this?
It's going to definitely make our jobs harder.
Yeah. I definitely will make our job harder. I mean, when I was at US Cyber, I did all offensive planning, so certainly the balance is on the offensive side. Depends what the target space is. So from the DoD perspective, at least from the defense of the DoD, I'm concerned, but I'm more concerned about like the critical infrastructure stuff. So that's putting my DHS hat on, right? So there's a real opportunity for some adversaries to get really, really huge ROI in terms of effect against the nation, right? And how do we potentially counter that? That's more concerning for me. It certainly will be a force enabler for them.
Any quick comments before we wrap up?
I think also it's going to make offensive. We're seeing this already with phishing, where they're using AI or ML to auto-scrape LinkedIn and come up with spear phishing campaigns that don't require a human to write them.
That's true.
Okay, all right. Well, let me thank for the very interesting discussion, and it's been a true privilege to moderate this discussion. Thank you.
Are we clapping for ourselves?